Despite the negative feedback that came with the movie, Street Fighter the movie was a commercial hit, making almost $100 million in profit worldwide.
You got paid?
On June 1995, Capcom released an arcade fighting game based on the live-action film. It was developed by Incredible Technologies and used digitized images of the film's cast to portray the characters in the game. This arcade game is considered one of the worst games based on the Street Fighter franchise and a poor attempt at imitating the Mortal Kombat series and its graphics design. However, when the game was ported to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn a couple months later, Capcom changed the game mechanics to play similar to Super Turbo, which made it a much more competent fighting game. The console versions also featured a forgettable story-based mode where players could play through the plot of the movie. Despite Capcom's efforts to fix the game mechanics, the game failed to be a success, most likely due to the fact that it was based on the film which many Street Fighter fans hated at the time.
Game over!
Meanwhile, back in Japan, Capcom continued their partnership with the group Taku to release an anime series based on Street Fighter II titled Street Fighter II-V. Compared to the animated film that came before it, the show is a much more loose adaptation of Street Fighter II, taking several liberties with the previously established storyline and characters from the games. Street Fighter II-V focuses on the adventures of a young Ryu and Ken as they go through a journey to improve their martial arts skills. Along the way, they befriend many other familiar Street Fighter characters as well as face off against numerous adversaries and villains like M. Bison. While Street Fighter II-V could easily be seen as another way Capcom cashed in on their success with the video game, the show had respectable merits of its own. For instance, the plot of the show was developed well enough to work independently from the video games. It established a new and different perspective that allowed the characters to be more human compared to their typically considered over-the-top video game counterparts. And at the same time, it paid homage to the source material by developing the Street Fighter characters and universe in a way that fans of the video game as well as newcomers to the franchise could appreciate. The show ran for 29 episodes from April to November in Japan in 1995. An English adaptation was produced by Manga Entertainment in 1996 on VHS and eventually on DVD. Around the same time in the US, Capcom continued to extend its fighting game franchise by partnering with Envision Entertainment to create an animated TV series that ran on the USA Network. The premise for the show borrowed elements from the 1994 live-action film but stayed closer to the storylines created in the video games. Once again, Guile is the main protagonist, but this time he commands a group of international crime fighters called the Street Fighters who battle against the criminal empire known as Shadaloo, run by Bison. The show mainly featured characters from Street Fighter II, but would also have character appearances from Street Fighter Alpha and Final Fight. Today, the Street Fighter TV series is widely remembered for its flaws rather than its merits. The characters and plotlines were typically generic, the animation ranged from noticeably inconsistent to downright terrible, and the writing consisted of numerous lines that were so bad they came off as either hilarious or just strange.
What do you want from me, Bison? My lunch money?
Oh, Guile, that color is you!
So, mate, how's it feel to be on the receiving end for a change?
Because of this, the show didn't last or have much of a following compared to other cartoons during the 90s.
Why does this always happen?
Like many shows based on video games at the time, many fans believed the Street Fighter TV show wasn't given the proper treatment the franchise deserved, and ultimately felt like another cheap cash-in by Capcom.
You're always looking to make a quick buck, Masters!
Even so, the TV series ran for 2 seasons, consisting of 26 episodes from 1995 to 1997. 6 years after the show aired on TV, it was released on DVD in April and May of 2003. By the second half of the 90s, Capcom Japan began focusing on more anime and manga built around other Street Fighter games. There was a manga series based around Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 3, and even a series based around the character Sakura and her quest to become a Street Fighter and face Ryu. In fact, Evil Ryu and Karen Kanzuki were characters that originated from the manga series and would eventually become included in the video games. In 1999, Capcom partnered with Group Taku for the 3rd time to produce a film based on the Street Fighter Alpha series. Street Fighter Alpha, the animation, would be a straight-to-video release and mark the 10th anniversary of Street Fighter II. An English adaptation of the movie was produced by Manga Entertainment and released on DVD in 2001. The story begins by mostly adapting many of the plotlines originally created in the Street Fighter Alpha series. Ryu contemplates the death of his master Goken while struggling to control the untamed power within him known as the Satsui no Hado. Chun-Li is an Interpol agent currently investigating the Shadow Law organization. and Sakura is an energetic high school girl whose encounter with Ryu inspires her to become a fighter as well. There's also a new and original story created for the movie. Ryu and Ken are confronted by a boy named Shun who claims to be Ryu's long-lost younger brother. Meanwhile, a biologist named Professor Sadler, who has ties to Shadow Law, is sponsoring a tournament in order to gather fighters from around the world for his own ends. While the film focuses on only a handful of the game's characters, there are many cameo appearances from other characters from the Street Fighter Alpha series. Even though the movie attempted to faithfully adapt many of the elements from the Alpha series, the overall plot for the film felt a little contrived and rather weak by anime standards. By the end of the film, the story doesn't have much of an impact on the Street Fighter characters and lore beyond that of a side story. Then again, given the release of the Street Fighter Alpha series and the release of this film, it was likely the intent of Capcom. In 2005, Capcom produced another film based on Street Fighter Alpha, but this time not with Group Taku but Studio APPP. This straight-to-DVD film was produced specifically for the English language market and has never been officially released in Japan. Street Fighter Alpha Generations was released by Manga Entertainment on DVD on October 25, 2005. While the movie is set in the Street Fighter Alpha storyline, it has very few connections to the prior film. The story begins by focusing on the origins of Goki and his brother Goken. Goki, who once appeared more human, longs to acquire greater power through the Dark Hado, but is denied his wish by his master Gotetsu. Still, his pursuit for power causes him to defeat his master in battle and descend into the demon he is today. Just before his transformation, Goki's more human side is shown in a moment when Sayaka, Gotetsu's daughter, shows a sign of pregnancy, and thus her connection to Goki. The story then moves forward in time to introduce Ryu, who has come to visit his master Goken's old dojo. He befriends an old man who invites him into his home where he meets Fuka, the old man's granddaughter. Not long after, Ryu is found by Sakura, who has been searching for him all over Japan in order to spar with him. Their fight inspires Ryu to challenge Goki, who has previously tried to tempt Ryu into using the Dark Hado against Goken's teachings. Unlike the Street Fighter Alpha film that preceded it, Street Fighter Alpha Generations didn't focus on the usual bunch of Street Fighter characters but instead on the Hadoken power inherited by Ryu and Goki from their predecessors that spanned back to ancient times. However, like the film that preceded it, Street Fighter Alpha Generations was also a victim of a weak story that wasn't really fleshed out as much as it could have been. Still, it served as an insight into the origins of the power that Ryu had become so famous for, something never before explored as much in prior films. In 2006, it was announced that Capcom would be teaming up with Hyde Park Entertainment to produce a new Street Fighter movie. The movie was reported to be unrelated to the 1994 film, but instead a new story focusing on Street Fighter's prolific female fighter Chun-Li. The movie would be directed by Andrei Bartkowiak, a cinematographer turned director who previously worked on films like Romeo Must Die, X and Wounds, Cradle to the Grave, and Doom. After months of speculation, it was announced that the movie's female lead would be played by Kristen Kreuk, an actress most famous for her role in the TV show Smallville. Other well-known actors were also signed on to play other characters from the Street Fighter franchise.
Everyone has a price.
The film was planned to be a more realistic and grittier version of Street Fighter, featuring fight sequences designed by the choreographer from The Matrix. Despite the hype and speculation of a film franchise that was built by the people behind the movie, Street Fighter fans still had their doubts. The movie was originally set to release in 2008 to mark the 20th anniversary of Street Fighter, but was delayed until February 27, 2009. Like